I am Mark, a normal man in his 50s who has spent almost half of his life building a family and a career. For me, my 25-year marriage to Linda has been not just a journey, but also a all that I ever cherished. I spent the morning preparing for my 25th wedding anniversary. Linda always said I was bad at giving surprises, so I was determined to make this day special. The guests had been announced in advance: Linda's close friends, her colleagues, and both families. I even hired a small band to play songs we both loved from our early years together. The house was filled with joy. Linda was busy in the kitchen, preparing what she called family specialties. Watching her move, a smile always on her face, everything seemed perfect, at least in the eyes of others. But inside me, a quiet storm was brewing. That perfection was like a veil covering the truth that only I knew. 2 months ago, I found a condom under my bed that didn't belong to me. From that moment on, Linda's every move and word made me wonder, what is she hiding from me? However, I never confronted Linda directly. Instead, I kept quiet and asked for help from my best friend Stephen, who was a private investigator. After just a few weeks, Stephen gave me irrefutable evidence. Linda was secretly having an affair with a coworker, Charles. When Stephen handed me the first photos, my heart stopped. There was Linda, the woman I had loved for 25 years, smiling happily with another man. The feeling was not only pain, but also emptiness, as if everything I had built in this marriage had suddenly become meaningless. But instead of letting my emotions take over, I decided not to say anything, at least until today, the day Linda thought I would express my love and gratitude to her. But in reality, this was the day the truth would be revealed. The celebration took place that evening. I stood in front of the mirror, mechanically adjusting my tie. My face in the mirror looked calm, but inside, everything was on fire. Linda walked into the room, wearing the evening gown I had given her for her birthday last year. "You look great, Mark," she said, a bright smile on her face. I smiled back, trying to hide the pang of pain inside me. "Me too," I replied, my voice calmer than ever. But only I knew that each word hid a secret she never expected. As we walked down the stairs, laughter and music drifted up from below. I looked around, seeing that my friends and family were all gathered. Linda held my arm, her smile unchanging. As the seconds seemed to stretch out endlessly, the party went exactly as Linda had wanted. Friends and family gathered. Laughter filled the house. I walked around the room, shaking hands with everyone, trying to keep a calm appearance. Linda was like a star, always the center of attention, from the way she talked to the guests to her sweet smile that never faded. But inside me, every passing minute was like a dose of poison slowly seeping in. As the clock struck 8 p.m., a text message suddenly rang from the phone in my pocket. I picked it up and saw a message from Stephen. Just a short line. "Charles just dropped Linda off at the hotel 3 weeks ago. Here's a picture point." There was a photo attached. Linda, the wife I thought was my whole world, standing outside the hotel with Charles. They were holding hands, their eyes filled with love, as if they had nothing to hide. My chest tightened, anger and pain burning like wildfire. I felt as if everything around me had suddenly faded away, the noise of the party becoming a distant sound. But instead of losing my cool, I took a deep breath and shoved my phone back into my pocket. This was no time to act rashly. From the moment I found out about Linda's betrayal, I had vowed not to let anything derail my plans. Everything was set in stone, and tonight, Linda would get what she deserved. "Mark, are you okay?" Linda stepped closer, her eyes filled with concern. She placed her hand on my shoulder, like a caring wife worried about her husband. I looked up at her, the smile on my face never wavering. "I'm just tired," I replied evenly. "I guess I've had a lot of work today." Linda smiled softly. "Don't worry, honey. Tonight is our night. We'll enjoy it." I nodded, maintaining a composure I didn't know I could maintain. Linda turned away, continuing her conversation with her guests, while I retreated to the corner of the room where the light didn't reach. From here, I could observe everything: Linda's radiant face, the way she talked to everyone, and the way she glanced at Charles from afar. Charles was also present at the party, which was not beyond my expectations. He stood in the opposite corner of the room, a glass of wine in his hand, his eyes occasionally furtive glances towards Linda. He had no idea that his every move was under my observation. At that moment, Stephen walked in. He was wearing a dark suit, blending into the crowd without anyone noticing. He nodded silently to me, signaling that everything was ready. The projector was set up, the video was prepared, and with just a signal from me, the truth would be revealed. I stood in the middle of the room, picked up my wine glass, and tapped it lightly on the rim. The clear sound made everyone around stop talking and turn towards me. Linda, who was standing with a few friends, also turned her gaze this way. "Thank you all for coming out to celebrate with Linda and me," I said, my voice echoing in the suddenly quiet space. 25 years. That's a long time. I'm so grateful for all the memories we've shared together, and I thought today was the perfect opportunity to reflect on that journey. Everyone smiled and applauded softly. Linda walked over to me and stood right next to me, her eyes sparkling with emotion. I glanced at her briefly, then turned back to face the crowd. "But," I continued, my voice slow and steady, "perhaps people don't know the whole story of this journey." A murmur of dismay began to spread, but I didn't give anyone time to say anything. I raised my hand, signaling for Stephen to turn on the video. The lights in the room dimmed, the big screen behind me lit up, and the first image appeared, Linda holding Charles' hand outside the hotel. For the first few seconds, no one said a word. Then there were gasps, confused murmurs, and then a heavy silence that filled the room. Linda stood frozen beside me, her face as white as if the blood had drained from her. If there was ever a time when I believed my life was perfect, it was that morning 6 months ago. I woke to soft sunlight filtering through the curtains, the birds chirping outside. Linda was in the kitchen, the steady clatter of knives as she prepared breakfast. We had lived like this for more than 2 decades. Not much, but enough to keep me warm and at peace. But life, perhaps, is never as simple as it seems. That morning, I walked into the bedroom after a shower. While looking for my shoes for work, I accidentally knocked over the bottle of vitamins on the bedside table. A small pill rolled onto the floor and went straight under the bed. I bent down to pick it up, and when I reached out, my hand touched something small, hard, and completely unfamiliar. I pulled my hand out, and in my hand was a condom. Unused, but just looking at it made me feel like everything around me was suddenly spinning. I sank to the floor, staring at the condom as if it were some alien object. My breath quickened, and one question kept repeating itself in my head. Where did it come from? The first answer that came to mind was that Jack, my eldest son, had used this room when his own room was remodeled a few months ago. Maybe he had forgotten about it, but then reason kicked in. Jack had never been so careless. And more importantly, hadn't Linda cleaned this room dozens of times since Jack left? Anxiety began to rise in my chest. Linda and I had never used a condom, not since I had been sterilized after the birth of our youngest Emily. This thing didn't belong to me, and there was no good reason for it to be here. I put the condom back, carefully, as if it were a bomb that could explode at any moment. In my mind, I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but doubts, like a worm, began to creep into my thoughts. When Linda walked into the room with a smile on her face, I tried not to let it show on my face. "What are you looking for?" she asked, looking at me curiously. "Nothing, just..." "Drop the vitamin bottle," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. She smiled, gently bent down to pick up the bottle and put it back on the table, completely unaware that just seconds ago, I had touched on a secret she was keeping. I felt like a sleepwalker all day. At the office, I couldn't concentrate on anything. The condom kept appearing in my mind, an inexplicable piece in the picture of my seemingly perfect life. Questions kept popping up. Had Linda cheated on me? If so, when? With whom? And why? But what hurt me the most was an undeniable truth. I didn't dare to face Linda directly. I didn't dare to ask her directly for an explanation. Instead, I chose to hide the condom, as if I was trying to protect myself from the truth I wasn't ready to face. That night, as Linda slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. In the darkness, I could feel her steady breathing. That should have brought me peace, but instead it only made me more confused. Who was this woman, with whom I had shared 25 years of my life? And had I missed something in all that time? The next morning, as Linda left for work, I sat in my car, my mind racing. I knew what I needed to do, but it was harder than I thought. After a few minutes of internal struggle, I picked up the phone and called Stephen, a close friend from college. Stephen was not only a friend, but also a private investigator with years of experience. He had helped me investigate a financial scandal a few years ago, and now I needed his help again. Stephen picked up on the first ring. "Mark, long time no see. What's up?" His voice was as calm and friendly as ever, but I knew I had to choose my words carefully. "Stephen," I said, trying to keep my voice as casual as possible. "I need your help with something very personal." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before Stephen replied, "I understand. Meet me at my office, okay?" Hours later, I sat in Stephen's small office, which was filled with whiteboards, clipboards, and cameras. Stephen sat across from me, his eyes scanning my every expression as I told him my story. From the discovery of the condom to the lingering doubts in my heart, I told him everything, holding nothing back. When I finished, Stephen leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped in front of his chest. "Mark, this isn't going to be easy, but if you want the truth, I'll help you. However, I need you to understand that sometimes the truth can hurt more than not knowing." I nodded, determined. "I need to know, Stephen. Whatever it is." Stephen started with basic questions about Linda's schedule, her work hours, her meetings, the times she was late. I gave her all the information I had, from the times Linda said she had work to do at work to the days she went on business trips without giving me much detail. Stephen took detailed notes, his eyes sharp as if he had seen something from the very first clues. "Okay," Stephen said, after gathering enough information. "I'll keep an eye on her for a few weeks. Just keep it casual. Don't let her suspect anything." I left Stephen's office feeling both relieved and weighed down. Relieved because I was finally starting to do something about my doubts, but weighed down because I wasn't sure I was ready for what was to come. About 2 weeks later, Stephen called me. His voice was low, signaling that he did not have pleasant news. "Mark, I need you to come to the office right away. I have something you need to see." My heart pounded as I walked into Stephen's office. He was waiting for me with a stack of documents and a few photos on his desk. Stephen pointed to the chair in front of him, motioning for me to sit down. Then he began to speak, his voice calm but heavy. "Linda met a man named Charles, a colleague of hers. I followed them for the past week. These are the pictures I took. They met after work, sometimes for dinner, and often ended up at a hotel on the outskirts of town." I picked up the photos with trembling hands. There was Linda, sitting across from Charles in a restaurant, a bright smile on her face. In another photo, she was walking out of a hotel, hand in hand with him. Each image was like a knife stabbing at my heart. I tried to stay calm, but my whole body was collapsing. "Mark," Stephen continued, "here's a video I took. It should help you understand better." He played a short clip of Linda and Charles entering the hotel. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen, even though every second that passed was breaking my heart. "Stephen," I said after the video ended, my voice hoarse, "are you sure that this isn't just a misunderstanding?" Stephen looked me straight in the eye, his gaze sympathetic but also very direct. "Mark, I wish I could say otherwise, but no, this is not a misunderstanding. I am sorry." I left Stephen's office with a heavy heart. Those images, those evidences, kept appearing in my mind, unable to be erased. Linda, the woman I loved and trusted the most, had betrayed me. I returned home from my meeting with Stephen, my thoughts a jumble. My home, once my safe haven, had become a prison. Linda was sitting in the living room, watching a television show, completely unaware that all her secrets had been exposed. I watched her, and every little thing, the way she tilted her head to laugh at a funny scene, the way she sipped her tea, felt like a knife to my heart. This woman, whom I'd loved for 25 years, was now living 2 lives, of which I was only half. I couldn't face Linda right now. What Stephen had just shown me was still too fresh, too painful. I walked into the bedroom, locked the door, and collapsed onto the bed. I opened my phone, scrolling through the photos and videos Stephen had sent me. Linda was smiling, her eyes shining as she looked at Charles. I couldn't remember the last time she had looked at me like that. I tried to find a reason. Did I do something wrong? Was I not good enough? But no, there was no excuse. Linda had chosen to betray, and now I had to face that truth. But not today. I needed a plan, a direction to protect myself, to protect everything I had built over the past 25 years. The next day, I called William, the best lawyer I know. We met in his office where I told him the whole story, from the discovery of the condom to the evidence Stephen provided. William listened, his face serious but not judgmental. "Mark," he said after I finished, "you're in a tough spot, but luckily you've prepared. The evidence Stephen has gathered is strong, and it will help you a lot if this goes to trial." William took out a notebook and began to plot his next steps. "First, you have to stay calm and not let Linda know that you have found out. If she suspects, she will start to cover it up, or worse, prepare for legal action. That will make things more difficult for you." I nodded, feeling relieved to have William on my side. "I'll keep quiet," I said, though my heart was boiling with emotion. "But we need a plan. I don't just want a divorce, I want everything out." William raised an eyebrow. "Expose? What do you mean?" "I want everyone to know the truth. Linda's friends, her family, her co-workers. I don't want her to get away with this." William sighed, but I could see he understood what I meant. "If that's what you want, we'll do it. But remember, Mark, you have to keep your head. Anger can make you make mistakes." I left William's office with a clearer determination than ever. I wasn't going to let Linda destroy everything without taking responsibility. But I also knew that for the plan to succeed, I needed to play the role of a normal husband for a while longer. In the days that followed, I lived like an actor in my own life. Linda didn't notice anything unusual. She still kept her morning routine of making me coffee, still asking me about my work, still joking around like every day. But now, every word, every gesture of hers only made me more bitter. I realized that she was so used to hiding things that every action seemed frighteningly natural. Stephen continued to follow Linda and Charles. One evening, he called me, his voice laced with tension. "Mark, Linda just left the company. Did she tell you where she was going?" I looked across the living room, where Linda had said she had to work overtime. "No," I replied. "She said she had to work late at the office." Stephen was silent for a moment, then continued. "She wasn't in the office. She just went to the restaurant, and Charles was there too." My heart clenched, but I tried to keep my voice calm. "What are they doing?" "They had dinner, had a nice chat," Stephen said, then added, "But, Mark, tonight was more than that. After dinner, they got into Charles's car and just checked into a hotel, about 20 minutes from your house." I clutched my phone, feeling my anger explode, but I knew I couldn't act right now. "Stephen, keep watching. I need everything. Pictures, videos, anything." Stephen replied, "I'm prepared. Stay calm." That night, I sat alone in the living room, the soft yellow light illuminating the framed family photos on the wall. I looked at the family photos, Linda smiling brightly beside me, and my two children, Emily and Brian. These should have been the happiest moments of my life. But now, each photo was a painful reminder of the betrayal hidden beneath the perfect facade. Over the next few days, Stephen sent me a series of photos and videos. Linda and Charles saw each other almost every day. They had lunch together, left the office at the same time, and ended up at the hotel many nights. In one video, Linda laughed loudly when Charles said something, her eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. This was not the woman I knew. At least, not the woman I thought I knew. A week later, Stephen called with the new information. "Mark, I've been looking into Charles. He's not just a cheater. He was fired from a previous company for having an inappropriate relationship with a coworker. Now he's using his power in the company to skip work and spend time with Linda." This information was like pouring fuel on the fire. Linda had not only betrayed me, but was putting our family and our reputation in the hands of a worthless person. This made me even more determined to expose everything. That evening, when Linda came home, she looked tired but still smiled as usual. "Work was stressful today," she said, dropping her bag on the chair. "Have you had dinner?" I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Okay, what about you?" "I had something to eat at the office." she replied, avoiding my eyes. I knew she was lying. Stephen had taken a picture of her and Charles at a restaurant just hours ago. I watched her, feeling something hard to describe. Not just pain, but exhaustion. I knew I couldn't go on like this much longer. The plan had to be carried out, and the upcoming anniversary was the perfect time. I called William and Stephen and told them I wanted to take the next step. We discussed and arranged everything together. Stephen had a full video ready, including all the evidence he had gathered. William, meanwhile, was getting all the legal paperwork ready to put Linda in a position where she couldn't deny it. In the final days before the anniversary, I focused on maintaining a facade of normalcy. Linda and I planned the party, sending out invitations to friends and family. Linda even suggested inviting Charles and her coworkers, and I agreed, thinking that this would be the last night she could continue living her lie. The 25th wedding anniversary was approaching, and I was ready to put my plan into action. Everything was carefully planned, from the party arrangements, the guest list, to the appearance of the evidence that Stephen had prepared. I knew that this was not only the time to end a dead marriage, but also to regain my self-respect and honor. Linda, of course, had no idea. She was busy preparing for the party, choosing the menu, decorating the house, and texting friends. "What do you think if I put up a row of lights in the garden?" Linda asked one evening, her eyes lighting up as if this were the biggest event of her life. "That's great," I replied, my voice calm. "Do whatever you see fit." Linda smiled and kissed me lightly on the cheek. The gesture should have warmed me, but now it only made me feel cold. I told myself I had to be patient, just a few more days. A few days before the party, I met Stephen and William at a small cafe where we went over the plans. Stephen opened his laptop and showed me a carefully edited video of Linda and Charles entering the hotel, leaving the hotel, laughing in the restaurant, and even hugging and kissing. The video was interspersed with photos and text messages between the two that Stephen had collected from various sources. "I have everything arranged," Stephen said, his eyes as sharp as ever. "The video will start at the time you choose. Just give me the signal and I'll turn it on." William nodded. "Mark, it's your job to stay calm. This isn't just to expose the truth, it's also to protect your legal standing. If you get angry or do something out of control, it could come back against you in court." I understood that, but the anger inside me was still threatening to explode. "I will keep calm," I said, though my voice was strained. "But I want to make sure Linda and Charles can't deny anything." William put his hand on my shoulder. "Mark, we have enough evidence to give you an advantage in this divorce. Trust the plan." That evening, when Linda returned home, she was busy checking the guest list. "I just called Charles," she said, not noticing the slight confusion that crossed my face. "He's coming with a few other colleagues." I nodded, trying not to show my emotion. "Good. It would be fun to have everyone there." Linda smiled, completely unaware that I knew all along. 2 days before the party, I spent the morning going over the entire plan. In my mind, everything had to be perfect. No mistakes allowed. This was not only a personal revenge, but also a statement to Linda and everyone around me that I was not a naive person who could be taken advantage of. Stephen came by my house that afternoon to check on the equipment. Together, we set up a projector and a big screen in the living room where the party would take place. He did a final video check to make sure everything was working properly. I stood there watching the images on the screen, feeling the pain and anger come flooding back. Linda and Charles appeared, laughing, hugging, walking into the hotel. Every moment of the video was like a knife cutting into my heart. Stephen put his hand on my shoulder. "Mark, you have to stay calm. Your feelings are important. Don't give Linda or anyone else a chance to change the situation." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'll stick to the plan, Stephen. I promise." The night before the anniversary, Linda suggested we go over the final list together to make sure no one was left out. I sat across from her, watching her carefully tick off each name. "Are Emily and Brian sure they're coming?" she asked, referring to our 2 children. "Sure," I replied. "I called them both. They're excited." Linda smiled brightly. "That's great. It'll be nice to have the whole family together." Those words, once again, made me feel like I was stabbed in the heart. Linda was still a thoughtful woman who knew how to arrange everything perfectly. But behind that facade, She was deceiving both me and herself. I did not respond, just looked at her in silence, wondering if she felt a little guilty for looking straight into my eyes. The next day, the house was bustling from early morning. Linda was busy decorating, setting the table, and calling vendors to confirm. I wandered around, playing the role of a calm and contented husband, not letting on any suspicions. Occasionally, Linda would stop to ask my opinion on some small detail, and I would always reply with a wry smile. She didn't realize that each of my answers contained a bitterness. Around noon, Stephen called to confirm that everything was ready. He said he would be there early to do a final check before the party started. I also got a call from William, reminding me that he would be there when needed with all the legal paperwork. "Mark, don't forget the most important thing," William said. "Stay calm. Don't let your emotions get the best of you." "I understand," I replied, trying to contain the emotions welling up inside me. "I will stick to the plan." As evening came, our house was ablaze with lights. Linda's friends, family, and co-workers were in attendance. The congratulations were endless, and everyone talked about what a wonderful milestone 25 years was. Linda moved through the crowd, smiling the whole time, as if she was enjoying every minute of the party. I, meanwhile, stood in a corner, observing everything. Charles arrived, carrying a bottle of wine and not forgetting to smile at me. I responded, keeping my face calm, but inside, anger was boiling. He stood not far from Linda, occasionally glancing at her, and I saw that she returned those glances secretly. Stephen stood near the projector, signaling to me that everything was ready. I nodded slightly, signaling for him to wait a little longer. This was going to be a night Linda would never forget, and I wanted everything to go exactly as planned. The party was in full swing, laughter and music filling the house. Linda was the perfect host. She moved from group to group, chatting, laughing, and making sure everyone was comfortable. But to me, it was all an act. Every word, every smile, Linda said was like a knife to my heart. Around 8 p.m., after everyone had settled down and the atmosphere seemed to have reached its peak, I stood up with my glass of wine. The whispers in the room gradually stopped as everyone turned towards me. Linda also walked over to stand beside me, her hand gently placed on my shoulder, as if this was a moment for both of us. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," I began, my voice slow but resonant. "This is not only an anniversary, but also an opportunity to look back on how far Linda and I have come together." Applause broke out, and I saw Linda smile broadly. 25 years is a long journey," I continued, turning to look at her, "and I thought there was no better way to commemorate it than to share with everyone here a little bit of the story, what it really was like along the way." Linda tilted her head to look at me, her eyes slightly surprised, but she didn't say anything. I glanced at Stephen, who was standing next to the projector, waiting for the signal. I nodded slightly, and the lights in the room gradually dimmed. On the big screen, the first image appeared, Linda and Charles entering a hotel. The room fell silent. The laughter died away, replaced by looks of surprise and confusion from the guests. Linda froze beside me, her eyes wide as she stared at the screen. I stood still, saying nothing, letting the video tell its story. In the next few shots, Linda and Charles sit across from each other in a restaurant, laughing and smiling, their eyes filled with affection. They then walk out of the restaurant, hand in hand, and finally enter a hotel together. The room freezes, save for the sound of the video and the gasps of a few guests. Linda turned to me, her face pale, her lips moving, but no words coming out. "Mark, it's not what you think," she whispered, her voice trembling. I interrupted her in a calm but bitter voice. "Linda, I don't need to explain. I've seen enough." The room fell into a heavy silence after the video ended. The light from the screen suddenly went out, leaving behind confused, embarrassed, and shocked looks from the guests. I was still standing there, a glass of wine in my hand, my eyes looking straight at Linda. She was trembling, her whole body frozen, unable to say a word. "Mark," Linda finally spoke, her voice choked. I can explain." I raised my hand to stop her, my voice firm. "No need, Linda. The video says it all. There's nothing more to explain." She turned to the guests, her eyes frantic as she sought support from those she knew. But no one looked at her with sympathy. The close friends she had invited now bowed their heads, Avoiding her gaze, a few people whispered to each other, whispers echoing in the room that had been filled with laughter. I turned to Stephen and gestured. He stepped forward, carrying the envelopes he had prepared beforehand. First, Stephen walked towards Linda and placed a white envelope in her hand. "Linda Miller," Stephen said firmly, "you have just received formal divorce papers from your husband." Linda held the envelope, her hands shaking so much that it almost fell to the floor. "Mark, you can't do this to me. We can talk, right?" She almost pleaded, her eyes red with tears. I looked at her, the feeling now not anger, but a strange emptiness. "Linda, I gave you 25 years, but you chose to betray me. Every word now means nothing." Stephen then walked towards Charles, who was standing not far away, his face pale. Charles tried to keep his composure, but his furtive eyes could not hide his fear. "Charles Thompson," Stephen continued, his voice even but sharp, "you're being sued for domestic violence and for destroying my client's marriage." Charles was speechless. He tried to open his mouth, but under the gazes of the guests, he could not form any words of defense. The once confident, arrogant man was now a shadow of his former self. The murmurs in the room grew louder as the full truth began to sink in. Some guests looked disgusted, others remained silent, trying to avoid the center of the embarrassment. I glanced around the room, catching sight of several of Linda's colleagues, including Charles's wife, who sat stunned in her chair, her eyes red. As everyone began to leave, the atmosphere in the room became tense. Linda stood there, not saying another word, while Charles quietly walked out the door. I looked at them, feeling nothing but exhaustion. Tonight, everything was over. Before Linda could say anything else, I spoke one last time. "I don't hate you, Linda, but I can't forgive you either. You destroyed everything we had, and now you have to take responsibility." Linda didn't answer. She stood there, silent, as I turned and walked away. After that fateful evening, the house that had once been our home felt cold and empty. Linda moved out just days after the divorce was finalized. She moved back in with her parents, and I never heard from her again. The house was all I had left, with its heartbreaking silence. The family photos still hung on the walls, but they were no longer symbols of happiness, but painful reminders of what had been lost. I spent the next few days wondering where I went wrong. How could I not have seen the signs of cheating? How could I have let the relationship go this long without realizing it was falling apart? But then I realized not every question has an answer. Linda made her own choices, and I needed to do the same. The divorce process was not easy. Despite the overwhelming evidence of Linda's infidelity, the law required us to divide our assets. Everything I had worked so hard to earn over the past 25 years, my house, my savings, and even my little mementos, would now be divided. Linda got half of my assets, and I knew that was the price I had to pay to get out of this marriage. The hardest part wasn't the loss of assets, but the impact on my children. Emily and Brian, though adults, were caught up in the emotional storm that the divorce caused. Emily sent me a short text message. "I need time to process this." Brian was completely silent, not returning any of my calls or texts. I don't blame them. I know that exposing the truth publicly at the party hurt them. Linda faces the consequences of her actions. After moving back in with her parents, she all but disappears from the social scene. Linda's former close friends, who used to compliment her at parties, now avoid her presence. News of the affair spread quickly, especially within the company where she worked. Charles, who was once confident and arrogant, was fired after Stephen brought the evidence to management. Company policy did not allow inappropriate relationships between employees, and Charles's affair severely damaged the company's reputation. Linda not only lost her job, but also faced ostracism from her colleagues. Colleagues who once considered her a perfect woman now looked at her with cold eyes. Worse still, Charles' family was also ruined. His wife, after receiving the evidence from me, immediately filed for divorce. Charles lost both his family and his career, becoming a symbol of failure in the eyes of everyone around him. For me, the first months after the divorce were not easy. I spent most of my time dealing with the silence in a house that had once been filled with laughter and happiness. I began to put my life back together, from packing my things to dealing with pending legal documents. But unlike Linda or Charles, I did not let the grief overwhelm me. One morning, while I was cleaning up my office, I received a note from Emily. "Dad, I know things are hard, but I need time. I love you, but it's too much for me right now. The note, though brief, gave me a little hope. I understood that my children hadn't turned their backs on me. They just needed time to process their emotions. Gradually, I learned to accept things and move forward. I sold my old house, which held too many painful memories, and moved to a peaceful suburb. I bought a small house with a large yard where I could plant trees and keep a dog for company. My work became a place to maintain my balance, and my friendships, though few, kept me from feeling lonely. 3 months after the divorce, Emily and Brian came to visit me. The initial encounter was awkward, but over time we began to talk more. They didn't blame me for coming forward, but they shared that the way I did it made them feel ashamed. I listened, apologized, and promised to do everything I could to repair our relationship. As for Linda, I heard from acquaintances that she was going to therapy and trying to find herself. She once sent me a letter of apology, saying that she never thought things would end this way and hoped I could forgive her. But I didn't reply. Forgiveness was no longer important to me. I no longer wanted to go back to the past, where betrayal had torn my heart apart. Life hasn't always been easy, but I've found peace in being true to myself. The painful days are over, and I no longer hold on to anger or resentment. Instead, I focus on what I have: freedom, self-belief, and the chance to start over. I moved to a small house in the suburbs, which was more peaceful and quiet than anywhere else I had ever lived. The house was not big, just big enough for me to feel comfortable. There was a large yard in the back where I planted a few young apple trees and small flower beds. I never thought I would enjoy living close to nature, but now the simplicity and slow pace of life were what I needed. Every morning, I wake up early to tend the garden. The birds chirping echoes in the quiet space. The sunlight gently covers the fields in the distance. The fresh air and the silence of the suburbs help me gradually heal my emotional wounds. I feel like a different person, no longer haunted by the past, but learning to enjoy the present. I also adopted a dog named Max. Max is a German Shepherd, intelligent and loyal. From the first time I met him at the rescue center, I felt a special bond. Max became my companion, walking with me through the small country lanes, or simply lying next to me under the shade of a tree while I read a book in the yard. Those peaceful days were not only healing, but also helped me find a new joy in life. I started taking art classes at the local cultural center, where I met interesting people and shared stories of everyday life. It turned out that being creative and focusing on new things not only helped me forget my old pain, but also made me feel alive again. Gradually, I realized that I was no longer haunted by Linda's betrayal or the pain of the divorce. Instead, I felt proud that I had overcome the most difficult period of my life. Every time Max lay at my feet, looking at me with trusting eyes, I knew that I was on the right path, towards a new life, free and peaceful. One of the biggest turning points in my journey to rebuilding my life was when Emily and Brian started coming back into my life. At first, things were slow and awkward. Emily would just call to check in, and Brian would text instead of talking to me. But that didn't bother me. I knew that, like me, they needed time to process their emotions. One weekend afternoon, I was surprised by a knock on the door. Max barked loudly, then ran out into the yard to meet two familiar figures, Emily and Brian. They both walked in with homemade cookies in hand and shy smiles. "Dad, we came to visit," Emily said, her eyes bright but a little reserved. I couldn't hide my joy, but I didn't want to force them to feel comfortable right away. I sat them down, made coffee, and we started talking. At first, the conversation was about everyday life, work, friends, and what was going on in the city. But gradually, we began to open up. Emily shared that she'd felt uncomfortable with the way I had exposed the truth about Linda, but now she understood that I had no choice. Brian, though less talkative, also admitted that he had been wrong about me at first. "I can't imagine how it must have felt when you found out," Brian said, his voice low. "I'm sorry I kept quiet for so long." I nodded, feeling like a huge boulder had been lifted from my shoulders. "I don't blame you. I understand things are hard for both of you. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I love you." That conversation lasted into the evening. We ate dinner together, laughed about old times, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a real family. As time went on, my relationship with my children improved. Emily visited more often, bringing new dishes she had learned from cooking classes. Brian, despite his busy schedule, always made time to call and check in with me. We started planning little family trips, things I thought I would never have the chance to do again. My life settled down, and I realized that I had found peace. Linda was still in my memory, but no longer a wound. She was just a part of my past, a lesson I had overcome. In my new home with Max and the flower beds in the garden, I learned to appreciate the small but meaningful moments. One evening, as I sat on my porch, watching the sunset over the fields, I received a text from Emily. Dad, I love you. Thank you for always being there for us, even when we didn't know it. I smiled, my eyes stinging, but they were tears of joy. I know I still have a long way to go, but that doesn't worry me. I've learned to face my pain, move past it, and find joy in life again. What used to be pain has now become motivation for me to live a better life, not only for myself, but also for the people I love. Life, with all its hardships and challenges, is still worth living. And I, Mark, am now not just a man who has been hurt, but a man who has learned to stand up, move on, and find myself again.